that sense of difference is really a false narrative. So when we're restoring our ecosystems, whether it be just around our yard or just around, the open space that's next adjoining to us and so forth, and be part of restoration, we are also part of an evolutionary process that's going on for 200,000 years since we walked the earth. And so it's a wonderful thing, but nature is absolutely created by us and we are created by nature. And again, so of course we have different fingernails and talk differently. I'm not saying we're distinct. I'm just saying we're inseparable.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better. Each week, I invite you to care more about social and environmental issues so that we can create a better world together. I'm thrilled to once again welcome Paul Hawken, a best-selling author and leading voice calling for the regeneration of nature and humanity. He has authored 9 books, published in 30 languages, including The Ecology of Commerce, Blessed Unrest, and Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. He joins me today to talk about his new book, Carbon, the Book of Life, published by Penguin Random House. It's now available wherever books are sold, at least here in the United States. With that, I hope you'll join me in welcoming him to the show. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's very good to see you again, too. I wanted to kick off today's conversation having just reshared some of my prior work on your former book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, really with just what inspired you to write this book, Carbon, which I see as a love letter to life itself. I'd really just love for you to talk about that.
You're not the first person who's described it as a love letter. I didn't think of it that way. When I thought of it, emerged in, the backstory is that I sold the book 11 years ago to my publisher. And then I said, well, before I get to that, let me do Project Drawdown. And they said, okay. And I did that and sold really well. And then after I finished that, I said, actually, I need to do Regeneration. And they kept renewing the contract. This is my editor. I said, sweet. And then finally said, we're not going to renew it again. I said, okay, wait, let me write it now. The book I proposed 11 years ago is not the book I wrote. And I think during that 11 years or 10 years, I watched the climate movement matriculate and grow, of course, and develop. And pretty soon everybody and their uncle was involved with it, in one way or another, really legitimately and deeply and profoundly, all the way to commercially and literally extractively, even though extraction is a cause of the loss of biodiversity. But so the whole spectrum, of human endeavor started to focus on climate. And so what I want to do is just pull back a little bit and just sort of time out. Can we just clean up our language? And the language is so much about fighting, tackling, combating, and othering. Those kind of words, very othering type of language, which is, of course, redolent in our society everywhere. We just talk about everything as something else instead of that inseparable connection we have to each other and to nature. And so I wanted to sort of move the conversation over to something that actually was more reminiscent of indigenous languages in that sense. They don't have that sense of separation built into the language, and they're educated with it. And so that's why, Chichen language doesn't, and others don't have the word for nature. And they didn't intend not to have it. They never saw it as other. So that's really different than us with our extraordinary language, English, the way we see the world. But it's very much about nouns, Corinna. It's very about naming. It's very about science. It's very about separation, which is good science, by the way. Nothing wrong with that. But that actually doesn't describe where we live and who we are and how our bodies work. And most importantly, it doesn't describe carbon, because carbon's a thing.
This is where I think I really took a lot from your book, and a story that I didn't expect to kind of unravel, which is the understanding in a really deep way that carbon, you cover this in the book. How many molecules of carbon exist in a single cell?
12% of 1.2 trillion. We have 10 trillion atoms per cell. So it's 1.2.
It's a mind-blowing number. I mean, then we have 36 billion or so of our own cells.
No,
and then
trillion.
Trillion. And then double that again if you can consider all of the microbiota that are present in our bodies, without which we could not live.
Right.
So we really are, in a way, we're a universe in ourselves. And yet carbon connects us to everything.
Just to that, it connects us to everything. Carbon is connected to everything, and carbon is innate to us too. It rather than it connects us, because in a way we still are saying, "Oh, it's out there," and we're connecting to it. So I'm trying to erase that, and that we've all learned, by the way, and we're good students, and we've heard it, and we've studied science, we went to school and all that sort of stuff. But connects us. Wait a minute, there is no separation between the flow of carbon in the world and us. And so us is a useful pronoun maybe, but it doesn't actually describe our relationship to carbon.
Well, that gets back to your comment as we started this show, just about nature and the fact that some indigenous peoples don't have a word that separates them from it, right?
Right. And that's because, well, I can't say why that's because. I can just describe what I think is because, and that is because they emerged in landscapes, some as old as possibly 65 million years ago. And we don't know really how far back, people actually settled down into landscapes and so forth.
So that in a way sits with this same narrative that nature in itself is something that is not even considered separate from the people and some indigenous cultures.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about us, almost automatically we circumscribe our identity as being different than nature. And as you mentioned, 40 trillion microbes that surround us and are in us and on our eyelashes, and that we breathe in every second, without which we would die. And so our life extends much further than our skin and our body, and goes much further, much more complexity than we have any sense of. And so in indigenous cultures, I think that understanding arose because they had nothing that we have in terms of technology and ways to actually manipulate the living world. They grew things, they harvested, they understand ecosystems in a way which is extraordinary, but they did it because they wanted to continue to live. And they didn't have they couldn't import food, they couldn't, can it and all that sort of stuff, so those cultures developed with an extraordinary sense of place and understanding of place that really informed their existence and their language. And if you look at I've only looked at a couple languages, that is to say the breadth of language that is defined or translated into English. And what occurred to me, which I've never heard exactly, but this because I'm not indigenous and I'm not but is that the language, like the Salklam Yamana language, in Chile, is actually teaches you where you live and how to live there. It's innate in the language, in the verbs, and the language is full of metaphors. And it was Aristotle who said metaphor is genius. And well, this language then is genius. And there's thousands and thousands, and this language, Yamana, there's 30,000 words. This approaches Japanese in terms of the number of words. And these people were called bestial by Darwin. Okay. So what a gap between people's actual existence and their language and the way they saw the world and related to each other and the way we saw them and what we do. So to say, that's what the book is trying to do, is just, and it's like I can't do it, but I can sort of point to it, which is like, oh my God, it's entirely different than what I was told, what I believe, what I read, as to who I am, or what you are, and what we are. And the most important thing is the we that never stops as a pronoun. it encompasses every single aspect of the living world.
Wow. Well, you talk often of language and the importance of things, I think, being active and naming them. Even when we first had a discussion about regeneration, it was naming the problem of what we're facing with the climate crisis. It's global warming. It's human-caused global warming. That's the problem. And reversing that is impossible if we don't confront it as an issue head on in the beginning. Over the past decade, we've made very little progress if we think about the whole, insofar as stopping pollution, slowing down the freight train that is progress for a capitalistic society. And ultimately, it seems like what is continually losing out is nature and nature-based solutions. The one area that I think is continuing to really see some strength is the growth of regenerative agriculture. I wonder what you're seeing from, the perspective of gathering the data to write this book. Like, are there emerging trends that we can all really think about and support and feel good about to help us engage with this challenge in a positive and progressive way? It's just something I've been chewing on since reading your book.
I chew on it every day. So my morning reading about what's going wrong and how fast, where, and then also looking to, extraordinary people in the world who are actively regenerating. And not just ag, but not to say ag isn't the most important in terms of we eat every day 3 times or whatever, but in all aspects of our existence, not just with ecosystems, but with children, not just with communication, but with, really resuscitating language, which is really, really important because language is inherent to cultures and it contains so much wisdom and information, if we parse it. So I would say in agriculture, it's an interesting area because much of what is being espoused or promoted with respect to trying to address climate, and we're not trying to address climate change because the climate is supposed to change. We're addressing our crisis, us. That's what we need to address. And the climate will change accordingly, but it's not like we can address ocean change. This is changing because of, carbonic acid and overfishing and pollution. But ag is an interesting thing because actually I've been involved with this for just pretty much all my life. What I see is people moving to regenerative agriculture and because it works better. In other words, it just works better. And so we're at the end of a long cycle started in the 20s and 30s, when, artificial fertilizers were first produced and it came out of Germany, for Tauber, that came out of the desire to make bombs more cheaply and more quickly for World War I. And then our pesticides came out of poison gases also invented in Germany for World War I, subsequent wars. So, but what happened is that we can feed top dress our plants, with nitrogen and obviously phosphorus and potassium as well, but NPK. And they did really well. Quickly, they grew quickly. They're green. They're big. More food, more whatever. And that was just game over, I think, for a lot of people in terms of where agriculture was going to go. This is progress. This is, science, at its best. But it turns out that in fact, it had the opposite effect than what was intended, which is, yes, on the short term, produce more food. If you start cocaine, you'll have more energy for a while. So there are things you can do to accelerate, or expand, but that doesn't mean that it is actually creating more life. It's actually can be consuming more life in order to get the payoff. And the payoff was more corn and soy, more this, more that, more wheat. And then, not surprisingly, more people got born. And more food, more people, more food, more people, more food, this cycle. But I think we're right at the cusp of, really seeing just how damaging and destructive it is. The runoff is 500 dead zones from agricultural runoff. I mean, in a dead zone in the ocean, just so we're clear, means that there's no fish because there's no oxygen. Jellyfish do okay on the surface. Sea anemones do okay on the bottom. But if you're a skin diver, there's nothing in between. And so that's one damage. Obviously, the damage is to the soil itself, because by top dressing and have the plants, basically be feeding, the top feeders in a way, they didn't really send their roots all the way down. And that process of the roots going down with carbohydrates, with the sugars, the plants metabolize from photosynthesis and CO2. I mean, those sugars, fed the bacteria, mycelia, and so forth, and they enzymatically, in the case of bacteria, broke down minerals, really important minerals, for the health of the plant and the health of us or the animals we eat. If we, whatever animals we eat the animals, or we don't. We go direct and we eat the plant. And so that was cut off. And then what happened then is the plants were not healthy. They may be big and green and grow faster, but that doesn't mean they were healthy. And so they were subject to infestation. Insects said, oh boy, this is fantastic. 5,000 acres. Let's go. And let's breed all.
So, yeah, you get infestations, locusts, grasshoppers, things like that. And then they just eat everything.
Yeah. And then what happened is that then the soil deteriorates and then you get weeds. And one thing that isn't talked about, is not understood, I think, and I learned this from Joseph Kokenauer, who wrote a book in 1930 for the University of Oklahoma called Weeds. And what he was saying is that if you look at a weed, a purslane, if you look at Canadian thistle, you look at, and you say, well, it's just like another type of infestation. Oh, there's weeds everywhere. Okay. Well, the soil deteriorates. Actually, plants want to heal the soil. So the weeds indicate what's happening below. And not to say we want to use weeds to restore our soil because we can't eat those weeds, but that's exactly why glyphosate came about and herbicides, right? So that accelerated the loss of life in the soil. So now, then the pesticides were the, coup d'etat when we started to coat the seeds with neonicotinoids, which last for 5 years, systemic. They go into the plant, they go into the leaves, butterflies and insects, eat the leaves, they die, or the birds eat the insects, they eat the plant, the birds die, the bees definitely suffer. And so that's our current agricultural system. So what we're seeing, again, they won't talk about it, but the Monsanto, Corteva, Syngenta, Bayer, etc., almost sub rosa, know that the future of ag is biology, not chemistry. I mean, biology is chemistry too, of course, but I mean, it's a system, not a chemical. And so you are seeing that, but what I see in countries all over the world is just people moving to regen ag and transitioning because it works better, it costs less, there's more productivity, the food tastes better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's interesting, of all the movements or practices that are address, a warming planet, this one is the one that I think is now self-feeding. It doesn't depend on subsidies. It doesn't depend on mandate. It doesn't depend on Donald Trump. It doesn't depend on, all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying that other renewable is important too, but I'm just saying is that it is nature saying, I know you gave up on me for a while, but this, this works so much better. And I think farmers one by one, but more of them by the thousands, whether they're small farmers or smallholders or whether they're big farms, in the Midwest and other places, are moving towards that.
Now, something I've reflected a lot on over the course of the last year, since really learning more from Robin Wall Kimmerer and her work with Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a phenomenal collection of essays about really nature and nature-based solutions that come from Indigenous knowledge. And she wrote this one chapter or this one essay called The Three Sisters, which really helped for me to ingrain this knowledge that Indigenous people who lived on this land long before us, they had these regenerative solutions at their fingertips, embedded in their culture. And as you have said, really in their language, or
Mhm.
even referring to these plants as the three sisters. And that was
Right.
corn, beans, right? The beans climb the corn, and then squash, which they would grow in concert. And having these three plants together, you have a cover crop, which is the squash. Low lying has, great expanse that will cover, but it helps keep the moisture inside. It doesn't steal the light from the corn or the beans that are growing from it because it spreads out. And so you have something that is both the beans fix nitrogen into the soil, which the corn loves. And so you have these diverse plants with roots that intertwine and connect and essentially enrich one another through just their individual properties.
Yeah.
And I mean, even as we see in the regenerative agriculture space, there are still farmers who are monocropping. There is more use of things like cover crops to ensure that they're not having to use all these excess nitrogen fertilizers that do run off from the surface. And then also this movement to try and stop some of the heavy machinery on the soil, which really compresses everything down and makes at least sections of the soil more like compacted cement than a rich soil with that vibrant life living in it. So I see positive movement. I also loved connecting with Tim Cruz, who he is leading the Lands Institute in a project related to testing kernza as a grain. Kernza has very, very deep roots and would grow taller than you or I holding our arms up. And so really getting moisture from the environment deep into the soil operates as channels so that your soil can retain more moisture. All of this makes sense, especially as we sit in this space where we have a warming world. And this in part is what gives me hope. I sit here still working in the natural channel, trying to find solutions, studying regenerative agriculture, working to get my PhD at Prescott College in specifically sustainability education, and then thinking about how these things connect. I want to talk about the social side of things because all of these stories, if we look to the deep history that Indigenous peoples have with the land, the things that we can capture and learn from them, from their language and from their customs and from the knowledge through stories that we've transmitted over time, there's an element of social justice that just seems to sit at the center of all of this. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about how we can generate more progress for the people at the same time, that we are moving this whole idea forward of supporting the drawdown of carbon, of regenerating life, of creating more life.
I think one of the most dangerous pronouns in English language is we,
Hmm.
because when we say it, who are we talking about? Who are we talking about? I just did it.
Wow.
Who am I talking about? That's the proper pronoun, because if I'm saying it, I don't speak on behalf of anybody else. And I was taught this by Indigenous people.
It's like the Big Lebowski, the royal we, right?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, it wasn't meant to be impertinent when they questioned that, but just the question was, who's we? But I think, again, about language in the climate movement, we're always we. Well, we are not a we. That's one of the biggest problems. We are opposite of we. We are a splendid fraction. We're atomized by our culture, by our language, but by our activity, by what we've done to each other and so forth. And so the question is very valid. It's not questioning that. But it's like, what can we do about the fact that we're not we?
Well, you're
And
speaking to lacking community. I mean, really.
yeah, exactly, which is, we starts with me. And so it starts with relationships, and relationships that are actually helpful and meaningful and kind and compassionate and fair. And that's the only way people could live together on this planet for a long, long, long time. And not to say there wasn't, warlike tribes or, but overall there was not. And so the question always comes up to me is, what can, quote, quote, we do about, this and this and this and this? And I think actually it's the wrong question, because the answer is no idea. And first of all, nobody knows what to do. Let's be honest. Nobody knows what to do. And I certainly don't, by the way, at least speaking for myself. And I think we just have to accept that we're in this extraordinary chronologically change of culture and of the entire planet, unlike anything that's ever been seen that we know of, except when the meteorite hit, the Chichikov meteorite hit in 65 million years ago. Since then, there's never been anything this rapid in terms of change biologically and on Earth. So we're in Terra Nova. This is not the Terra we always knew, or people always knew, the people lived on, people adapted to. It changed, of course, So going back to the question is like, again, what can we do? That's why I say, what can me do? Me, in other words. And that is the most important thing, is to become what we want to see, what we favor, what we believe to be a way of living and being and seeing and relating, that is kind to self and other, and it connects and doesn't separate and doesn't disconnect. And it's a, and I think the thing is, when you read the headlines, you read what's going on, you go, you don't have time, right?
Mm.
There's no time.
There's no time.
And and I understand that, the momentum and of what's going wrong, of the damage, the extraction, the killing, destroying. And yet, I would say that what's hidden is regeneration. And I don't mean that in terms of ag. I mean it in terms of life wants to regenerate. That's what life does. We are life. And there are tens of thousands of communities and peoples around the earth doing things that are regenerating their land, their forest, their culture, the water, their source of sustenance. And they're struggling in many cases. They're not funded necessarily, but they're making the connections. That is, the connections to this is causing that. Let's stop that and let's do something else. And we don't see those people. We don't hear about them. We hear them once in a while. We can read about this tribe, this culture, this people in Bolivia, these people in Missouri. I mean, it's happening, but it makes it, they're small by nature. And so it makes one feel that, well, great, amazing people. Thank you. But that there's no collective growth or size, to it. And in some ways that's true, but what we're seeing is an emergence. We're seeing human beings respond. And yet you don't see it in the New York Times as opposed to the Guardian or this or that or TV or the, whatever source of media you get. You may get it on Instagram, depending on, whatever on social media. But again, it always makes it gives a sense of minutia, of smallness, of minority, of tiny, of this. And that's because we can't step back and see it in its entirety.
Mm.
So what I would say is that, the earth is on fire. We are burning. This is a fire, and we don't know when it will go out. We do know that it could just extinguish life on. And there's a lot of small talk about this solution and this, and if we only do that by 2100, I'm sorry. People don't understand the momentum of change that's occurring right now. But unlike a fire where after it's burned the forest, and then, in the next spring you start to see new growth, you're seeing new growth in the fire at the same time. You're seeing yes, there's the Monte Negrino and the Chanderson, down in the Amazon, these extraordinary stories of people pushing back against, in this case, oil companies and exploitation and extraction and the ruining of the waters and the tribal culture. And they won, and it's an amazing thing. But there's very few things like that where it's 500,000 hectares and, big, and it's a huge victory in Ecuador. Who knows how long that victory will last, by the way, because oil companies are on the march and they're they'll corrupt government leaders just as quick as you can. But I would say that rather than thinking in terms of doom and hope, which I'm not interested in either one of those. Frankly, I'm interested in reality. And I believe that we are seeing an extraordinary emergence of understanding in the world. And that's why I say, in the largest, greatest sense of the word, the only path forward for humanity is regeneration. There is no other path forward. And now you may have a small, sort of constrained definition of regeneration, but I mean it in the way you asked that question, which is that means absolutely every person, every human being, every species, every animal, every pollinator, every ecosystem, every river, every stream. I can go on naming, and that's the only way forward. And we're doing it. It's beggared by the rate of damage and extraction. But, one thing we have to look at is, like, people talk about renewable energy and it's so great. It's, current solar income and wind turbines and so forth. Yeah. I mean, 7% of electricity is from wind turbines. 3%, after 25 years is from solar panels. But that's just electricity. That's not oil. That's not coal. That's not gas. In as much as those things produce electricity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. But actually steel, concrete, roads, cars, aluminum, plastic, it can't be made by electricity. You can have all the renewable energy you want. It can't be made by electricity. It's made by coal, gas, and oil. And to this day. And so again, we have to look at, well, are we, and I see this, are people assuming that if we get enough renewable energy, we're good to go at 2050? Net zero? And the answer is just a resounding no. That's not true. Net zero what? I mean, does it net zero no fossil fuels by 2050 but just renewable? But the world we live in cannot be run with electricity. We can't do it. Try to run a freighter from Hong Kong through the Panama Canal to New York on electricity. Not going to happen. So we have to really look, I think, to understand, where we are with very realistic eyes, which is we cannot live the way we are. We cannot live the way we are. I say we in a global sense, the global economy. And that's tough news to me. I mean, but I just want to be honest. There is no data to suggest that if we go 100% renewable, that we will get to where we want to go. Can't.
When we say something as simple as we need more life on Earth, we need more regeneration, then you can't just keep paving over everything.
That's
because
right.
the moment you pave over everything, you create hardscapes and you kill life. That's essentially what you do. So, more thoroughfares and highways, more paved jungles, that's not going to do it. So,
yeah, I mean, for example, EVs, put aside Elon Musk, EVs, okay, great EVs, well, maybe. We have 1.5 billion cars in the world today. By 2050, IEA says we'll have almost 3 billion. What? Okay, let's say they're all EV. So what? They're driving on, just as you said, on roads. How do you make a road? Concrete.
More concrete. That's right.
How do you
parking lots?
How do you make asphalt? You can't make it with electricity. So somebody somewhere is using coal, gas, and oil to make these things that our EVs can drive on. Again, I'm not trying to gainsay other people's initiatives, and I'm just saying, can we step back and look at the whole? And that's what the climate movement is not doing, in my opinion. And it doesn't. It assumes that if we get to net zero and so forth, does that mean we can live the way we're living right now? I mean, are we just feeding a consumptive society in a different way? Because it's for sure, if we get to net zero, that we won't stop using coal, gas, and oil. We won't.
Yeah. I mean, it's so astute. Like, we are in a consumerist society. And so if we're in a society that is essentially funded by consumption, like that's how capitalism is built, then if we stop consuming, then suddenly a lot of things start coming to a screeching halt. Like, we haven't built an economy that can be more circular. And so it is a remaking, a reimagining of how we do things, and a commitment on the part of people like myself and anybody listening to the show right now to try and reduce everything they can in that way. Not to say to live without everything. Like, my kid is in baseball now, and he tells me, I want to play catcher, Mom. We're looking at this stuff, and he's like, okay. I'm like, well, for one, I'm not going to spend $250 because you tell me today that you want to be a catcher, and next week you're going to tell me you want to play a different position. I'm not going to buy all the new gear for you, right? But we'll go to Play It Again Sports down the road, and we'll find some used gear for you to try out, right? And it's improving the life of something. It's also acknowledging that, I can't follow every whim and give my child this culture in my home of immediate satisfaction every time he has some desire, right? There has to be a little bit of a weight. There has to be a reason behind things, and we have to think about it. And he's actually at a point now, because I've followed this through for the 10 years of his life, where he prefers used. He's actually like, Mom, that would be great. Like, if we can just go, can we go check this out and see what they have? Okay, guess what? They don't have the chest plate for him in his size. But we're going to go ahead and do these other parts. And if he's still excited about it, we'll keep looking, or we'll get on their list and they'll let us know when they have something in his size.
Yeah.
It's a different way of thinking about how we consume. And it's thinking about what you actually need versus what you're told you need. Do you need a new car every 5 years? Is that going to make your life better? And these sorts of questions are the things I ask myself as, now I have a Jeep and an electric car. My husband has a big truck that I try to encourage him to almost never drive, but he also needs it. Like, if his motorcycle breaks down and he wants to pick up the motorcycle. It's not to say we have to stop everything, right? And be like, peel the Band-Aid off and that's it. You're done with everything that you want in your life. Like, okay, maybe it means you don't have the F-250 anymore. You think about, paring down your possessions in a way that's mindful of resources and that can save you money with time too. I mean, these are all things I think about. And I think we need to all be thinking in this way. Like, how do we get as much as we can out of living while also supporting a reduction in overconsumption? Because what we have is overconsumption.
Yeah. And again, I use the word we a lot too, and you just used it.
I did.
But it's not we. It's actually the privileged 10% of the world you're talking.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
It's me.
Yeah. And me too, by the way. I haven't bought an EV yet. I've got a 15-year-old hybrid that actually Bill Ford gave to me. And we drive 4,000 miles a year. And, and the most ecological thing I can do is just keep it going, by far, But that doesn't make me a saint in any way. And I just don't think we understand the impact that we're having, and overall, and certainly in the privileged people. And so much of the climate tech, much of the conversation about what needs to be done, and the IEAs and all these different agencies, the World Bank and the Davos and the COPs and Conference of the Parties, is the privilege talking to the privilege. Yeah, they'll invite, like the Montenegro, they'll invite people from, other cultures, to talk, kind of just like they did with Greta Thunberg, for a while. A young person telling the truth, how novel, let's listen. It's like, but it doesn't take, because the momentum of the privileged society is overwhelming. It's making the decisions. It's money. It's acting out of fear now, trying to get more money in case, it's the prepper community. It's got the guns. It's got the food for 6 months. It goes on and on and on. And it's going the opposite direction of where we want to go, which is, hi, my name is, and, we haven't met each other yet. To be a neighbor, to be somebody who cares, about others, and also to, reduce radically, our impact, but also to understand that unless we have a climate movement that is really addressing the current existential threat, not future, because the privileged is always worried about the future existential threat. This could happen, it's getting warmer, this, water, storm, tornadoes, drought, floods, for sure. But if we're not addressing current existential threat for the 6 billion people, let me say that again, 6 billion people on this planet who wake up every morning with current existential threat.
Yep.
Then we're not serious. And it could be their children, it could be safety, it could be food, it could be education, it could be healthcare, it could be their home. It just goes on and on. It's quite a list. And that is the world we live in, occupy. That's the world we occupy. So if we're focused on our navel about, oh, wow, I got a Tesla and I'm really a good person. It doesn't matter if it's Tesla, whatever, electric car. Okay. But how much are you driving? Do you share? Do you walk? Do you live in such a way that actually is a light footprint upon the earth? Or have you just changed the devices? Or you just change this and change that? I have solar on my roof. I've had for almost 20 years. I don't think they're very efficient compared to what they have now. I have a heat pump. I don't have any natural gas. I don't need, at all. I cut it off from PG&E. Said, take it away. The meter, everything. I don't want it. I'm trying to be self-sufficient where I am, but on a larger scale, I live within a consumer society, in a town that it's just filtered, just infiltrated with privileged people. And I think my question to you is, how do we get this conversation out of its, privileged surroundings and beliefs that dominate it? And so people feel like, well, if they've done this and this, well, they've done enough. I did something, well, this is what everybody has to do. It's just not true, Corinna. That's why I say two things. We don't know. We really don't understand how bad things are. We really don't. And we don't know where we live. We do not know where we live. We have no idea where we live. I'm talking about where we live, this place, this house, this land, this forest, this whatever, grassland. We have no idea, no understanding of where we live. And those are bad places from whence to be the architect of change.
Well, and most people have no idea what their land looked like before there was 4 square walls built onto it.
Yeah.
So, we've changed the topography of the spaces that we live in so dramatically from before. There's really almost no concept of what existed before. Like my home abuts an open space preserve. But before it was an open space preserve, it was dairy land. So you better believe that they did some clear cutting to make grazable land, that the forests that were here dominantly before there was grazable land were mostly redwoods, and now it's, oak and chaparral, right?
Okay.
So we changed it before, and we changed it again and again, and we paved over spots of it and everything else. But it does mean that the entire life that exists here has changed too, right?
Right.
So more ground squirrels, less other life, maybe more coyote than cougar. But, the nature will find a balance too. And if we can support the ecology and pave less and try to tread more lightly and steward the land you're on as opposed to just replace it all with hardscaping, then we can do things like even create a little bit of a butterfly corridor on our own land and support the natural ecosystem that could exist there. Those things, maybe it's me focused and making small changes and not as grand and large as we might hope, but we can make a difference in that way too.
No question. And in doing that, I plant for, pollinators and food and, and butterflies, because I love looking at them. and I have a pond, and the dragonflies come up, pretty soon, about a month or so, and I love them flitting around, and so beautiful. And I can't believe that they actually have a life cycle on my little plot of land. However, I do think that these things, the value to them is also to start to teach us about where we live again. And when I say we don't know where we live, I don't mean to say you're ignorant and a scientist knows where you live. I don't mean it that way. I mean it in a very profoundly wondrous way. Okay. And I don't want to sound like a doomsayer here, because I'm not. But at the same time, I do want to speak truth to power and so forth, and call it out, and say, look, that just won't work. That's not working. That is delusional. That is basically, you're just feeding your sense of guilt, or you're in denial. So that I will do. But I just also want to say that when we start to understand where we live and how it works, ecosystems work, it's extraordinary. The thing about nature, we say, okay, there's nature-based solutions. I love that one. I don't like it at all. People say that. But anyway, the point being is that for 200,000 years, our Homo sapiens, and then Homo neanderthalis and Floridiensis, and, but the Homo species has been radically changing the earth. Radically. There's 40 different mammals, that came across the bridge from Russia, which was that Russia and so forth, and people extirpated them all. Amazing. We can dig them up, the bones and so forth like that. Obviously, the woolly mammoth is the most famed one, but there's so many others, the aardvarks, things like that. And so when those animals were extirpated, then the whole landscapes changed, because they were changing the landscape. We know, that ruminants, that is grazing animals, grazers and so forth, are regenerative. But we also know that when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, because they had been extirpated, every wolf in the United States had been killed. Every single one. We had to get them from Canada to repopulate Yellowstone. That the whole ecosystem changed. Because once, the wolves are there, well, that changed the whole relationship, between elk and wolves, because the elk they could just sit around, stay there, eat whatever they wanted. They had to move and get out of there and be much more alert and not breed as much and so forth. And the rivers came back, and, the beavers came back, because the river sides weren't overgrazed, all sorts of things. Well, this has been going on for 200,000 years. What I'm trying to say is that animals have changed nature. Nature changed people. And so the idea that we can restore nature, yes, we can, but the idea that we and nature somehow evolve separately, no. The whole world, every single parcel and acre of land, except maybe glaciers, in Greenland, were modified by us, and their change modified who we were, what we ate, how we lived, our cultures, hunting based. Could we actually be, in equatorial regions, could we not be based on hunting, but on the Three Sisters, which came out of the Incas? And so again, that sense of difference is really a false narrative. So when we're restoring our ecosystems, whether it be just around our yard or just around, the open space that's next adjoining to us and so forth, and be part of restoration, we are also part of an evolutionary process that's going on for 200,000 years since we walked the earth. And so it's a wonderful thing, but nature is absolutely created by us, and we are created by nature. And again, so of course we have different fingernails and talk differently. I'm not saying we're distinct. I'm just saying is that we're inseparable. And that inseparability is something to wake up to and say, oh my gosh, And what I'm trying to do in the book, The Carbon, the Book of Life, is to start to reintroduce or introduce people to, I guess, their family. Maybe I don't use that word in the book, but your family of living creatures, including plants, And there's this beautiful new sort of coming together of Western science and indigenous ways of ecological knowledge. And they're combining and respectfully of each other as opposed to, being downplayed. Science was so arrogant about what other peoples knew and did in practice. And that is being washed away. And out of that is emerging a new understanding. And that understanding is we don't know. It's not the empiricism and finality and arrogance of Western science. It is a new understanding of like, oh my gosh, okay. And it's a mystery. And so these scientists are entering with that understanding and that awareness and that respect. And as I mentioned in one, just about where we live, a scientist studied the roots of a single grain of rye and counted them in an electron microscope. And there's 14 million roots, 4 million root hairs. So put those aside, 10 million roots on a single kernel of rye. And those roots are connected to mycelia through hyphae. And the roots are talking to the mycelia talk to them. They're transacting. Here, I got some sugar. What do you need? Nitrogen, whatever. That's like a kernel of rye. And so I'm looking outside my window at redwood trees here. How many roots do they have? Who knows? But it is communication. And we know mycelia communicate to each other and to plants, and plants are communicating that way. This isn't a mechanistic process. It's not chemistry. It is chemistry involved, but I mean, this isn't what we think of something that's inert. This is something that's alive. We know mycelia have clicking sounds that is in the packets of them, and they arrange them, and they're transferring nutrients in two different directions at the same time in these tiny, tiny, tiny little 4 or 5 cell thick vesicles, and that there's more life underneath the soil than there's above. Okay. All over, there's more below. So we talk about the earth. We actually don't know what we're talking about.
Well, Paul, I think this brings us to kind of the last phase of the conversation I was really hopeful of having today, which really is about how life exists within a single cell. And I've heard you describe this, but if we think about all life and really engaging with it in a new way, not separating ourselves from nature, of being part and parcel of the same thing, this interconnected web of life, that the cell itself, in a way, is a microcosm of all life on Earth. Like if you take a single cell and all of its parts on their own, they're not really alive. And I've heard you talk about this. I would love for you to connect that thought to this real magic that is life and that is carbon.
Well, yeah, it goes down to what is life, really. And they 10 estimated trillion atoms, which are actually then is chemistry, because they're not all there by themselves, they're combining. It's just a big lab, big chemical lab. It's like that many molecules in a cell are busy, right? And they have the mitochondria, which are like, almost a second cell within the cell, really.
They look like a bacteria for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
they look like they're their own thing.
Yeah, they got into a cell that became eukaryotic cells, they're called. But that technically inside the cell is chemistry. The cell as a whole is alive. And science cannot explain how that's true. I mean, you can say, well, the whole cell is alive. That's fine. But without the sensors, without the, being held in a sense by that barrier of the cell, if we're just analyzing what's inside the cell, it's not alive. So in that sense, with profound respect, we don't know where life comes from. We see it alive. Don't get me wrong. And cells love to talk, and they have sensors, and I say love to talk. I'm anthropomorphizing it, but they do communicate. And then that communication, actually cells like to be together too. And 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I mean, they grow things and make things, all of which, is life on Earth. But there is at the heart of this sort of like, and some scientists will push back against me to say that and some don't, but I don't really care one way or the other whether they do. I'm just saying is that chemistry itself is not life. Chemistry within the cell is life. So that's the miracle. And we breathe it. We look how it works. We're talking, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary, but it's true for every single thing that's out there. Everything is underneath, above, around, beyond, and so forth. And the understanding that we have had up to now, particularly in Western cultures of the living world, to me has been very truncated, very mechanistic, very atomistic, very reductionist, even though it's been, there's a million names for all different things, but it doesn't matter. Naming isn't the same. And so I think we're at that threshold. I mean, obviously the world can't go on the way it's going to go. So that's obvious. The question is, what is life going to do? We are life. What are we going to do? I don't have the answers. I don't have like, oh, you can do this and this and this. I think most people who are watching this are literate and they know what to do. Don't try to do everything at once. You can't do it. Just take one step at a time, one step at a time. And then connect to family, neighbor, friends, connect to place, connect to pollinators, I got up early this morning and it was before dawn and I was looking at the budleia that I planted years ago for butterflies. And there was all these hummingbirds, they got up early. They all live for 2 years, these things. And they're just so beautiful, and that kind of understanding, but just to see that, just beautiful interconnection. Again, where I'm overusing really, but I mean, the inseparability of life and its interdependence, it's not like there's a difference between complicated and complexity. And complexity is living systems, ecosystem, complex adaptive system. Complicated means you can separate and fix things, very complicated. A car is very complicated. This computer is very complicated. And we've been thinking about the world like we're going to fix it. Like it's complicated where we are, but we can fix it. We can do this, do this, do this, do this. Instead of actually using our right brain going, oh my God, it's like one thing and we are part of that one thing or one stream of life. Carbon is a flow. It's not a thing. And that's just like the cell, 1.2 trillion carbon molecules. What are they doing in there? Well, they're part of other systems and they're functioning, they're doing things. They retain energy and memory, carbon chains. Like no other element does that. And so our carbon, the book of life, is saying, hey, take a look. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what's possible. And to take that with you because it changes you. And then, when you read the morning news and go, oh my gosh, who said that? Are they dumber than a stick in mud? They are. Are they selfish? Are they greedy? Are they deluded? Are they heartless? Not core, but are they acting that way? It's like, yeah, that's our family. And so it's always about who we're going to be, and who we can be is just taught to us every millisecond by what we call life.
Yeah. Resounding themes through this book that I find were really inspiring. And also, even though you say, you're not, I don't know that you would call yourself hopeful, right? Because the word hope, it's like, no, you want to know what you can do, like get to work on it, right? But I think a call to stop thinking in a really reductionist way, a call to think in a collaborative framework, to consider your spot among the people in your community, how you fit with nature, and ultimately to get you thinking differently. I also will point to a few of the solutions that you talk about in the book, like in Bentwood, which I was thrilled to learn about. The fact that we're creating some technologies to build new buildings, to to replace things like steel, which could ultimately mean that we have more regenerative materials at our grasp, that we're working with nature, like in the case of bamboo, which can be then repurposed to create tools like InventWood that can replace steel and that are far less costly insofar as energy and fossil fuels and all these other things to build, so that we can create solutions that make sense and support populations as opposed to destroy our ability to continue living on this beautiful planet. So,
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of climate tech. I'm a big fan, though, of inventors and geniuses who create technologies that actually create more life. And that's
yeah,
what it's all about. Regeneration is like, do we want to destroy more life inadvertently, unintentionally, but actually, or do we want to engage in activities and technologies that create more life on Earth?
hmm
And to me, the answer is dead to rights obvious. There is no other way forward than to do that. And yes, there are technologies. So I'm not anti-tech at all, but they have to be brilliant, ingenious technologies like InventWood, they can replace steel and aluminum completely. And
they're truly inspiring. Like, really,
yeah,
like
inspiring. And there's these geniuses out there that are really doing some wonderful things. And so I'll talk about that more in the next book too. But so again, I want to say humanity is incredible and it's brilliant, and it's covered over by the wave of greed, hate, and delusion from a capitalist society, and the fear it creates then makes people want more and more money to be safe and secure. And that's,
it causes us to separate and then to want to hoard, essentially.
yeah, yeah.
So they hoard money, they hoard resources, they hoard, homes, places. Suddenly you have companies buying up all the apartments in an area, driving up prices, and,
I know.
you know,
It's greed, 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 greed,
it's
greed.
greed. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
And that's why. How do we get there? I don't know. But I know that I don't use the word hope. That's true. But because I feel like I don't want to be hopeful. I want to be proactive. I want to be courageous if I can. But you can't, where I sit, and the books about that, and also what I read and do, and the forthcoming books is about the extraordinary quality of human beings. They are extraordinary.
Yeah. And I love where research is headed too, going away from these, I have the only answer, there's one truth, to listening to, you know, different perspectives and ultimately gaining knowledge from a variety of angles, acknowledging that there is no singular truth and that what we learn tomorrow changes what was true yesterday. I mean,
Yeah. I don't know if we talked about this before, but Zoe Slandra is a writer.
mm,
She wrote a book called Light Eaters, which is about plants that they eat. But she said that after spending 8 years, researching this book and talking to the top botanists, who didn't want to go on the record as saying this, but they certainly spoke to her about it, saying the only way we can understand a plant is that the total plant is a brain. In other words, when you look at all the things every plant can do, we have no other word for its functionality. And, the idea that the brain has to, have two lobes and neurons and all that sort of stuff is true for a human being. But in terms of what the plants can do, in terms of their 20 senses, we have 5, they have 15 more than we don't. Been here longer, learn to adapt, they're sessile, they can't move around. And that botanist thing, that's the only thing that comes close to describing the functionality and the capability and the intelligence and the communicative abilities of plants is that it's the brain.
yeah.
So, and that's where we live too, right? With all those beautiful.
I mean, we barely understand insects.
Yeah. I say to people, if you want to have a good time at night, get an ultraviolet flashlight and go outside
Mm.
and then look for the moths. And they're all lit up brightly. It's just like, it's like a light show.
Yeah, it's amazing what you'll see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I loved your book, not surprisingly, and I will just say this is recommended reading for anybody. And that wants to consider a closer connection to nature. I think it's also a spiritual journey, because there's nothing, when you really start to dive into this topic of life, it's like you can't approach it with the same childlike wonder without wondering, how did this come to be in the first place? How did carbon become the root of life? How can there exist trillions of these molecules within a single cell? How is it possible that we are organized to be the beings that we are, and the plant that's in the soil that can't move somehow knows how to extricate the nutrients it needs to thrive from that environment, from rainy season to drought, to expel seeds that might not germinate for a generation? I mean, it's incredible wisdom that we are yet to even come close to understanding.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful privilege to be alive.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. I will read your book again, continue dog-earing it. And for those that have listened to this interview and also followed the earlier journey, I went ahead and did about a 30-minute book review of Carbon and offered some quotes and some perspectives from that. So I'll encourage people to go and take a sneak peek at that and pick up a copy so that they can follow along. I can't wait for our paths to cross again, and I hope I get to shake your hand in the near future.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And tell your son I was your shortstop.
Shortstop. He's wanting to play catcher now, so we'll see how that goes.
That's hard, but that's difficult. That's so hard. I mean, the two positions have the most pressure is pitcher and catcher. Like that, if you're a shortstop, you just either make it or miss. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'll be sure to share that with him.
Thanks, Corinna. Thank you so much.
To find out more about Paul Hawken, his important work with regeneration, and his latest book, Carbon, the Book of Life, please visit our show notes. You'll find direct links to his books, websites, social media, and also the blog page for this episode, which includes direct links to all of the past episodes on regeneration, as well as my interviews with Paul. And while you're visiting our website, I encourage you to join our email list. When you do so, I'm planting a tree. So for each new subscriber to the podcast, as well as each new subscriber to our newsletter, I'm planting a tree through my partnership with Forest Planet. Thank you, listeners and watchers, now and always, for being a part of this podcast and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more. We can be better. We, me, you, can build healthier, carbon-rich soil, regenerate all of Earth's ecosystems, the life beneath our feet and the life above it, so all on Earth can thrive. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.